Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It is Monday, March 24th. What is going on, everybody? Happy March Madness. It's a very unique time in basketball, I would say, because I feel like the hype and attention and the viewership for basketball is probably never higher than what it is right now with everybody watching college basketball. But the problem is, none of that viewership, none of that excitement is really going toward the NBA. So the point of this podcast is going to be me catching you guys up on everything that you missed in the world of the NBA while you guys are watching March Madness. And it's just such an interesting time of the year because while all this attention is driven toward March Madness, you have arguably the worst time of the NBA regular season. I mean, this really is the dog days in terms of guys tanking, guys being hurt, guys missing games for rest, whatever that looks like. I mean, dudes are not playing in these games. The finishes really have not been competitive. And so it's been ultimately a pretty uneventful couple weeks. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was overflowing with content to talk about on this podcast today, but we're certainly going to make the most of it. Now, before we get into the NBA stuff, if you are wondering how my bracket's going, turbo dog shit. It's really rough. I mean, every year, I'm not watching much college basketball, so I spend about 3 to 4 minutes building the bracket, mostly based off of vibes, right? Schools I like, schools I don't. I mean, naturally, I'm a Duke fan. You guys might see, if you're watching on YouTube, the Duke shirt that I'm rocking right now. Any year Duke is remotely decent, I'm going to pick them to go all the way, especially when they're a number one seed and they have the number one ranked player who's going to be the number one pick in the upcoming NBA draft. I mean, I kind of had to jump on that bandwagon. The problem is that even if Duke actually does get the job done, my bracket is still terrible because the rest of the country also picked Duke. And so I'd say where it really went south is I picked St. John's to go to the finals for really dumb reasons. I mean, I just felt like they had all this momentum. It was like an East Coast thing, felt a little isolated being not a part of it, being in Texas. And so I was like, screw it, St. John's. And then I watched that game against Arkansas and I'm like, oh yeah, I hate Rick Pitino. Like, I've always hated Rick Pitino. I mean, most of that is rooted in how awful of a coach he was for the Celtics. Granted, I wasn't really like alive and aware during that time, but I can't stand Pitino. He looks like a corpse on the sidelines. I know his best player had a bad game, but he like benches his star player even when they're down and they need offense. And then he's a dick to the reporters after the game. And I'm like, oh yeah, great. That's what sank my bracket this year. So needless to say, not thrilled with how March Madness is going. The women's bracket is equally bad, if not even worse, than the men's bracket. And so all that being said, let's turn things over to the NBA, where I have a little bit more knowledge about what's going on. And so just to give you an idea of how bad it has been in the NBA, I made a list of players who have missed at least one game just in the past calendar week. And now some of these are legit injuries. Others are due to like rest or tanking or whatever. But here's a list. You guys can just get an idea how bad it has been. Jason Tatum, Drew Holiday, Chet Holmgren, Evan Mobley, Jamal Murray, Zach LaVine, Tyrese Halliburton, Austin Reeves, SGA, Lauri Markkanen, Trey Murphy, Kristaps Porzingis, LeBron James, Darius Garland, Luka Doncic. And then we also have a subsection of guys that are still out with ongoing injuries. Ja Morant has missed 4 in a row with a hamstring injury. Jaylen Brown has missed 4 straight with a knee injury. Celtics have actually won all of those games without him, which is pretty impressive. Jokic has missed 5 straight with an ankle injury. That has real implications for the MVP award. Bradley Beal has missed 4 in a row with a hamstring. Tyrese Maxey, he's technically injured. He might just be tanking/resting at this point. He's missed 12 games in a row with back and finger injuries. Damian Lillard, 3 straight with a calf. Jalen Williams, 6 straight with a hip injury. Zion, 3 straight with a back injury. Steph had a pretty hard fall the other night, landed awkwardly on his back. They're calling it a pelvic contusion. He's already missed 1 game. I doubt he plays tomorrow. And then he had Anthony Davis, who obviously has missed like a bunch of games during that stretch, but actually returned tonight for the Mavericks. So that's kind of cool. And we might talk about that in a little bit. And so I think the only real notable one is obviously LeBron. I mentioned him already. He returned from a 7-game absence due to a groin injury. Trey Murphy listed him there. He was out for the season with a shoulder injury. So the injuries continue to pile on for the Pelicans. But that's what, 20 something like all-star caliber players that have missed a game within the past week. And that's not even including guys like Victor Wembanyama and Joel Embiid and Paul George, who are already ruled out for the season. Like, I didn't even include them for the sake of this exercise. Not to mention that the games themselves haven't been that close either. I mean, the only close finishes that I can think of that have been entertaining to watch were Pistons Heat a couple nights ago. You had Cade Cunningham banking a 3 in an isolation possession against Bam Adebayo for the win. Kind of a lucky shot by Cade, but that's just kind of the way the Pistons season has been going, especially when you compare it to the slide that Miami had. You had Thunder Clippers last night, which was great. You saw, again, a really healthy-looking Kawhi Leonard play great down the stretch. It was super close throughout, and the Thunder ultimately kind of clamped up Kawhi Leonard. I think Harden had a look on the final possession as well, both of which could have won the game for the Clippers, but the Thunder were able to pull that one out. And it seems like every Pacers game that's going on right now comes down to the wire, so they're kind of one of the most exciting teams in the watch in the NBA right now. But all that being said, we've had a ton of guys missing games. Again, not a lot of close competitive games that have come down to the wire. I think the most notable thing, if I were to tell you guys anything of what has happened in the world of the NBA, I think the most notable one is that the Cavs did lose 4 games in a row within like the past week and change. Now, it is kind of funny that the Cavs have been so good and they've reached the threshold where a 4 game slide during an 82 game season is like noteworthy, but I do think it's worth diving into a little bit. Now, this is not an active losing streak because they did play the Utah Jazz yesterday and they broke their 4 game losing streak, but that's not saying much. We all know the direction that the Jazz are headed at this point in time, but they lost a game against the Magic, a game against the Clippers, a game against the Kings, and then finally a game against the Suns on Friday. So I just wanted to dive into the specific performances in this 4 game losing streak, tell you exactly what played out, and then we can kind of judge together whether we think this is meaningful or nothing to worry about for the Cavs as they cruise to what will likely be the #1 overall seed in the Eastern Conference. So starting with that game against Orlando, I mean, this is old news, over a week old at this point, but the Cavs didn't have Mobley in that game. Cleveland shot 25% from 3, including 3 of 14 shooting from their best player, Donovan Mitchell. Meanwhile, the Magic, who have been the league's worst offense on some metrics and near the bottom of the ranks for 3-point shooting all year long, they shot 42% from 3, so significant gap there between the Magic and Cleveland's shooting, and ultimately the Magic were able to pull out a pretty close game. The Cleveland only allowed 108 points in this game, so that wasn't too concerning, but that was a game where they were expecting to win. They were at home at this one. They had a 16-game win streak going on, and the Magic broke that streak. Then the following game, it was at the Los Angeles Clippers. This was probably Kawhi's best game of the year. He finished with 33 points, 7 rebounds, 4 assists, and 4 steals. And like, just eye test wise, like the burst that Kawhi showed getting to his spots was insane. I mean, he was blowing by guys. He was finishing at the rim, obviously finishing in the mid range. He was hitting the 3 as well. I mean, he was just like incredible. At one possession specifically, he got switched onto Mobley late in the game and hit like a really tough turnaround baseline shot that looked fantastic. And meanwhile, he wasn't the only one cooking for the Clippers. You had Zubac, who has been incredible this year, all season long for the Clippers, just bullied Cleveland's bigs, putting up 28 and 20 rebounds, just nuts. Cleveland allowed 132 points, which is pretty unforgivable, and a really tough game from Donovan Mitchell in this one as well. 5 of 18 shooting, that was good for 18 points. The Clippers were able to pull that one out pretty comfortably. Next game in the losing streak, you had a game at the Sacramento Kings. Now, the Cavs didn't have Garland in this one, but the Kings were also pretty shorthanded. I mean, they were missing Sabonis, Zach LaVine, and Jake LaRavia. You had a really incredible offensive game from Mobley, but at the end of the game, what was pretty interesting is like you saw the Kings actually seem to go out of their way to hunt Evan Mobley, which I know you're still dragging a big onto the perimeter and teams are going to look to find that mismatch, but I still can't imagine it's Mobley would be the matchup that you'd be seeking out in that sense. But one way or another, they got DeRozan onto Mobley for 2 clutch buckets in the final 2 minutes of the game, and DeRozan delivered both times. Devin Carter, also just a complete side note, was incredible for the Kings in that one, and the Kings were able to win, and they scored 123 points in that one. And so, again, I think that one, honestly, now that I say it out loud, that one's probably the worst loss just with how undermanned the Kings have been, and frankly, they're not that talented of a roster. And then finally, the last game in the losing streak, you have the game on Friday at Phoenix. Cleveland was fully healthy in this one. Meanwhile, Phoenix was actually a little undermanned, missing Bradley Beal, Grayson Allen, Nick Richards, and Mason Plumlee. And this one, I think if you could chalk it up to anything, it was just the incredible Kevin Durant performance, right? 42 points on nearly 60% shooting from the field. And on the other side of the ball, you had Donovan Mitchell really struggling again in this one. 7 points on the game, which is got to be a season low for him, I'd imagine, on 2 of 18 shooting. I mean, really gross effort from Donovan Mitchell in this one. And again, back-to-back games where Cleveland allowed 123 points, and Phoenix shot the ball really well from 3, shooting 45% from beyond the arc. So, but what does this really mean for the outlook of the Cavs as we head toward the playoffs? I'm going to start off by saying probably nothing, right? I mean, this is the stretch in the season where it's so easy to be misled. You have bench players that are filling in for starters, putting up crazy numbers, and you have to justify if that means anything. You have teams that are hot, teams that are cold, and frankly, we are just in the dog days of the season, and a team like Cleveland really doesn't have much to play for, and it is a long West Coast road trip. I mean, that's going to be tough for any team, but it does have some real implications, right? The Celtics are within striking distance of the #1 seed in the East, which I did not think was going to be possible at all. I mean, To say striking distance might be a little generous because they are down 5 games with roughly 10 games left to play. I will admit that the Celtics have a way easier schedule down the stretch. Really, they only have to worry about a game against Memphis and the Knicks. Obviously, they're capable of losing some other games as well, but I'd say Memphis and Knicks are the only teams that really scare you. Meanwhile, Cleveland has to go through the Pistons, the Clippers, and the Knicks twice, and the Pacers twice. So those could all be losable games for a Cleveland team that's shown some weakness. And you most likely lost the number one overall seed with that recent slide, right? In the event that we do get a Cavs Thunder finals at this point, it's looking much more likely that the Thunder are going to have home court in that series. So wouldn't be overly concerned about that right now as a Cavs fan. You have a lot of work to do to get to that point, but that's kind of surprising, right? It seemed like the Cavs were going to be in position to be the number one overall seed before this recent slide. But I did just want to point out if there was any individual performer that's fallen short recently from the Cavs, and you can tell just by the box scores that I went through right now, it's been Donovan Mitchell, right? The slump that he's in is pretty real. In his last 10 games, he's only averaging 19 points per game on 32% shooting from the field and 17% shooting from deep. So that's really concerning, but I must admit, like, if there's any guy on the Cavs that I'm not going to be worried about, it's Donovan Mitchell, right? He's easily the most proven playoff performer. And maybe I'm just like less worried because I obviously watch Donovan Mitchell most closely when he's playing the Celtics, and he is like the ultimate Celtics killer. I saw something ridiculous that he recently surpassed Michael Jordan for highest points per game average against the Boston Celtics like ever. So I might have to like double fact check that, but I thought that was so crazy. I wanted to share it. I mean, if this was like Evan Mobley, where he suddenly regressed and offensively he wasn't showing as much as what he did earlier in the season, or Garland went through a slump like what we saw him go through last year, at that point I'd be much more worried about Cleveland, because you're wondering, hey, can these guys be the second or third best player on a team that makes a deep playoff run? But I kind of feel like Donovan Mitchell is not going to be shaken by this. He's certainly not going to lose his confidence, and he doesn't like look worse to the eye. It seems like he's still getting to his spots. Like physically, he's just as athletic as what he's ever been. So I think that that's probably a reason to be positive about this whole situation, is you can just chalk it up to Mitchell's bad shooting. But the biggest concern from Cleveland has to be like the overall team defense, right? We talked about the point totals that they allowed during that stretch: 108 points, 132 points, and then back-to-back games allowing 123 points to teams that aren't overly impressive on the offensive end of the court. Like, you still need to hide Darius Garland. You still need to hide Donovan Mitchell depending on the matchup. And as much as we all love Evan Mobley, he is going to be in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year. It feels like his candidacy for that award has been knocked down at least one peg, right? You've seen him hunted by multiple different teams here at this point. I know the Celtics' most recent game against the Cavs, in which they blew that big lead, Jason Tatum was consistently hunting the matchup against Evan Mobley on the perimeter. And I know that's Jason Tatum, who's an incredible player in his own right, but still, the fact that he was able to punish Mobley time and time again, you saw DeRozan do it the other night. For whatever reason, despite how great Mobley is on that end of the court, teams still feel comfortable attacking him on the perimeter if you can get him in the right matchup. So that's just worth noting, that like, hey, you have these two smaller guards, and now the guy that's supposed to be your anchor behind the whole thing is being hunted a little bit as well. And look, as much as we all like DeAndre Hunter, that's clearly an incredible trade for the Cavaliers. That's clearly a major pickup that makes the team better. I don't think he's like the quote unquote like lockdown guy. Like, he's not Lou Dort. He's not Drew Holiday, right? He's not Alex Caruso. And I know I'm comparing him to these elite defenders on elite teams, but if you want to put Cleveland in that class and say that they should be the outright favorite to come out of the Eastern Conference or maybe even win the whole thing, it is really nice to have a guy that you can just throw on a perimeter scorer and expect to disrupt things at least a little bit. Good offense is going to win every time, but DeAndre Hunter isn't going to totally change the course of the game on defense and really disrupt a player like Kevin Durant, who they couldn't seem to stop that night. So those are the guys you're going to have to get through if you ultimately win the award. And so it is worth noting, during the same stretch, the Celtics have won 5 straight, and they're 9-1 in their last 10. And Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis have looked amazing lately. So it feels like the tides are shifting a little bit in the East. And I am a biased Celtics fan saying all this, but I got to call it how I see it. And I feel like ultimately the Cavs don't have much to worry about. They're probably not going to blow the number one overall seed, but I do think this gives the Celtics a little bit extra confidence heading into the playoffs. And I do think the defense is just worth monitoring for Cleveland. Can they get right? Can they finish the season ripping off another 8-9 game win streak? Absolutely. But I think at this point you want to see, if you're a Cavs fan, you just want to see the team defense go up a level, and you want to see Donovan Mitchell break out of the slump that he's been in over the past couple of games. All right, I snuck in a little bit of Celtics talk there at the end, so I figured this would be a reasonable time to bring up what I believe is probably the biggest NBA story to come out of the last couple of weeks, right? This is old news at this point. You probably have already heard it, but because this does pertain to my favorite team, I wanted to share that the Boston Celtics were sold for a record $6.1 billion last week. A gentleman by the name of Bill Chisholm has purchased a team from the Grossbeck family. This is the largest sale price in sports history, essentially, right? Certainly American sports history. I'm not sure if you open it up worldwide if that still holds, but that 6.1 billion price point is especially notable because the arena, the TD Garden where the Celtics play, that was not included in the sale, right? So I guess they're essentially still paying rent to that arena to use it 82 times a year, or 41 times per year. So I guess that's pretty notable. The fact that they basically doubled the price of what the Mavericks sold for just over a year ago at this point in time is also notable. But needless to say, I'm sure the Grossbeck family is very happy with this. I'm sure the NBA is very happy for the price that the team was sold for, all that stuff. I think the most notable piece of this story is the role of what the previous Celtics owner, Wyc Grousbeck, is going to have moving forward, because it's being reported that Wyc was asked to stay on as the team's CEO and governor for the next 3 seasons, and he's glad to do so. So, of course, he said yes, he wants to stick around, and Celtics fans should be happy about that, right? It seems like Wyc, obviously the current majority owner of the team, his approval rating really couldn't be much higher, right? He gets out of the way. He's always let Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens do what they want to do in the front office. They haven't been afraid to go into that luxury tax, right? Pay some luxury tax, go into that first apron, second apron, whatever. He's been a part of 2 different championships in 2008 and last year as well. I mean, there's nothing to not like about this guy from an ownership perspective. And so that's why it's really, from a Celtics fan perspective, the idea of selling the team is just risky, right? Because it can only get worse. It's not exactly a good story if you're a Celtics fan right about now. Now, it is a great news if he actually does get to stay on board as team CEO and governor for the next 3 seasons. But in reality, I just don't think it's going to play out like that. And the most recent example, and really the only example you need to show that this might not be how it ultimately plays out, is what just happened with the Dallas Mavericks, right? Last year, when the team sold in December of 2023, there was an agreement in place between Mark Cuban, the previous Mavericks owner, and the new majority owner, Patrick Dumont, where Mark Cuban was going to stay on as president of basketball operations, not just for like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. It was just in perpetuity. It was for the foreseeable future. Mark Cuban was still going to be the face, would still have the final say in really any basketball decisions pertaining to the Dallas Mavericks. And then 14 months after that report came out, we obviously saw the team go out and trade Luka Doncic without Mark Cuban even being notified of that. Mark Cuban had clearly washed his hands of the team well before that. And so that is obviously a nightmare scenario. I'm not saying that's going to happen with the Celtics, but what I am saying is that obviously if you pay someone $6.1 billion for something, you're going to expect to take over that control right away, and you're going to want to make those decisions right away. And many other people have reported on this, so I don't think it's anything new, but I would just be very cautious about the idea of Wyc staying on board. If Celtics fans want to make themselves feel better by saying, it's okay, despite the sale, we're still going to have the same owner, they're still going to support this team, this new guy's a Celtics fan, whatever, you can definitely feel that way. But my guess is that we're going to feel the presence of the new owner. Bill Chisholm, again, is his name. I think we're going to feel his presence this offseason, right? Because new owner syndrome, or whatever you want to call it, is a thing. Guys want to make their splash one way or the other, whether it's a move to, hey, maybe I just have not as deep pockets as the previous ownership group. Maybe I want to make this luxury tax bill a little bit more manageable. Let's move on from a veteran player, right? Let's move on from a bench piece. Let's find a way to cut down our payroll a little bit. Maybe that's a move. Or maybe it's the other side of things where it's like, hey, I own the Boston Celtics. Let me show how competitive I am. Let's make a splashy trade, right? Like, it's obviously hard for me to predict what that trade would be if they want to go out and get another star player, something crazy. Really, it all depends on the results of this upcoming playoff run. Like, if the team fares well and makes another deep run, I'd find it hard to believe they'd mix it up too much, but you really never know. Like, it sounds crazy to expect this Celtics fan to come in and take things over and radically want to switch things up given the recent success of the team. But again, when these billionaires purchase these teams as if it's a new toy, that's what tends to happen. So all things considered, I'd still rather have the reports out there that Wyc is staying on board, that we're not going to see any real immediate changes with management ownership of the franchise. I think that's probably more positive that that's out there, but in reality, I don't really buy it. I think by this time next year, I think the new guy is going to be fully in control of the team, and hopefully he shares the vision of the Grossbeck family. Hopefully, because apparently he is a Celtics fan, that we can expect to maintain this current core for as long as possible. But the reality is, I'm not sure if that's going to be the case. So I'm going to be extra invested in this upcoming playoff run because we really don't know what the state of the Celtics is going to be moving forward and how willing the new ownership is going to be to foot the bill for the largest payroll in North American sports history, like what the Celtics are doing right now. All right, let's bring it back to basketball and what's taken place within the past couple of weeks. Some teams I wanted to focus on a little bit because some notable streaks, one way or the other. We got to talk about the Miami Heat. They lost 10 straight games in a row. Now, again, this is not an active losing streak because they were able to right the ship yesterday in a win over the Hornets, which, again, isn't saying much. The Hornets aren't all that competitive. But realistically, this means nothing for the Heat. I mean, they were already trending in the wrong direction since the trade deadline, but they're still locked in to like the 9-10 play-in game. They actually have a chance to make it up to the 9 and surpass the Bulls, who've actually been playing really well lately. But it's just kind of funny that the East play-in race has been such a joke when you compare it to the West. Like, in the West, you're probably still going to have two teams that somewhat deserve to be there. And on the Eastern side of things, like, let's be real, the Bulls and the Heat all season long have not really been competitive. And this recent slide for the Heat can really be stemmed from like really bad execution in the fourth quarters. But I'm not going to lie, I still feel pretty bullish on the outlook of Miami as a whole, like especially when we look ahead to next year. I feel like Wiggins has been a sneaky, really good pickup and was a really good piece to get back in that deal for Jimmy Butler. He actually had 42 points last night and has been playing some of the best basketball of his career since being traded to Miami. And I still really like the guy they drafted in Khalil Ware. I think he's been averaging like 14 and 12 with a couple of blocks over the past like 10 or so games. He's been playing much better as of late. He's been like the full-time starter for the better part of 2 months now, starting at the 5 next to Bam Adebayo. Like the fact that you got a 7'2" guy that can run the floor, protect the rim, hit shots from the outside, and has barely filled into his NBA body yet as a rookie, like that's really impressive. If we were to do like a redraft of the top 5 picks of the 2024 NBA draft, I think Khalil Ware is definitely in the top 5. He's either there at 4 or 5 in my opinion. Moving on to a team that finally is actually playing a lot better, some positive news for you guys. We have the Houston Rockets. I mean, they were up to the 2 seed earlier in the season, and they fell down the standings quite a bit, but they've worked their way all the way back to the 2 seed because they've won 9 straight games. Now, again, this is not an active winning streak. It seems like I just recorded this podcast one day late because they did lose to the Nuggets last night. Jamal Murray had it cooking, had like 40-something points. But all that being said, the Rockets are in a really great spot to ultimately secure that number 2 seed heading into the playoffs. I mean, they've survived a few games without Amen Thompson, who has been huge for them this entire season. Jalen Green has come back to earth a little bit, but they just have so many guys that they don't need Jalen Green to have it every night. They don't need Şengün to have it every night. They don't need Fred VanVleet to have it every night. They just have this rotating cast of like 8-9 players. But if I'm Houston right now, I'm really hoping that Memphis is the team that falls all the way down to the 7 seed in the Western Conference. I feel like a lot of people are not taking the Rockets seriously once the playoffs actually start, and I might fall into that camp as well, just because there's so many proven Western Conference teams that are led by veterans and future Hall of Famers, and the Rockets just simply aren't in that camp. And I feel like experience makes such a big difference as we get to the playoffs. If they can somehow find their way to play a team like Memphis, where yes, Memphis has more playoff experience than really anybody on Houston besides Fred VanVleet, I'd still much rather play Memphis and their playoff experience rather than a team like the Lakers or the Warriors or even the Clippers with how well they're playing right now. I just feel like Memphis and Houston are similar teams, both on the younger side of things that have had similar trajectories. And that's actually one of the series that I would take the Rockets in pretty comfortably. And just while we're on the topic of talking about the Western Conference standings, I wanted to dive into that. I think if there's anything that you should be paying attention to with roughly 3 weeks left of the NBA season, it has to be the standings in the Western Conference. Every single year, it's been so tight-knit between the teams atop the Western Conference standings, and it truly feels like after the Oklahoma City Thunder at the number 1 overall seed, the 2 through 8 seeds between the Rockets, Nuggets, Lakers, Grizzlies, Warriors, Timberwolves, and Clippers really couldn't be much closer. I'd say right now, the Rockets, Warriors, Timberwolves, and Clippers are definitely trending up with all those teams winning at least 8 of their last 10 games. You have, on the other side of the coin, the Grizzlies, Lakers, and Nuggets trending downwards right about now. Most of that due to injuries, right? Obviously, Ja Morant has missed a handful of games with a hamstring injury. You have Jaren Jackson, who missed some time as well, returned from that ankle injury, and it's been a little sluggish. They lost Brandon Clark for the remainder of the season, which is a huge blow for Memphis. The Nuggets, obviously, they're trying to hold on without Nikola Jokic right about now. The Lakers just went through a recent slide without LeBron James, who obviously returned last game. So I think the Nuggets and Lakers will be just fine. The only team of that group I'm really concerned about is the Grizzlies, but it's going to be super close, right? Like a 2-game win streak, a 2-game losing streak could be the difference between the 3 seed and the 8 seed, and that's how it's been the better part of a couple years. So I'm just paying really close to what's taking place in the Western Conference, all the way down to the play-in race, really, because once we get below those top 8 teams, you also have the Kings, Suns, and Mavericks that are in an absolute dogfight for those final play-in spots. Personally, I'm hoping that the Suns and Mavericks are the ones that ultimately land in those 9 and 10 spots. I think that would be super entertaining to rekindle that Suns Mavericks rivalry from a couple years ago. And I think that's just like the most chaotic outcome that can come of all this. You have the Suns and the Mavericks who have had arguably the most disappointing seasons in the entire NBA, and now they have to fight for the death for just the chance to make the final playoff spot in the Western Conference. That'd be pretty entertaining to me. So that's really what I'm honing in on during the last couple of weeks of the NBA season. Now, before I let you guys go, I just want to do like a rapid fire of random NBA headlines that I found either funny or interesting over the past couple of weeks that I wanted to share with you guys. Starting off with the Orlando Magic. I don't know if you guys have paid attention to this, but Corey Joseph has been the starting point guard for the Orlando Magic for the better part of 2 months now at this point in time. Corey Joseph is what, 33? I'm kind of surprised. I felt like he was drifting closer to 40 at this point in time. He was drafted in 2011 and has played on 7 different teams. And frankly, if there was any takeaway from him being the starter for the Magic, it's probably an indictment on Anthony Black. I actually like Anthony Black when he gets in the games. Maybe I haven't watched him enough. But moving on to the next headline here, you had Bronny James with a really big game for the Lakers the other night. Actually led the team in scoring with 17 points. Now, I'm actually a fan that Bronny had a moment in a game in which LeBron was out, Luka was out, I believe Austin Reeves was out as well. So basically the Lakers just like mailed in that one game. And it was pretty cool to see Bronny get some buckets. He had some confidence, obviously put up 17 points, but it is worth noting that like, hey, he's still not there yet. I mean, he finished as like a negative 36 in the game, which I know plus minus is often misleading, but in this case it wasn't because it got beat so bad by the Bucks. And in the game where Bronny led the team in scoring, it was not a coincidence that they only scored 89 points as a team. So, big moment for Bronny James, but just wanted to provide a little bit of extra context around it. He's probably not ready to be in an NBA rotation yet, but he might be. Moving on to the next headline here, we had Aaron Gordon single-handedly beat the Warriors in a national TV game last week as well. You guys might have caught that because, again, it was on national TV, but no Jokic in that game, no Murray in that game, and they actually beat the Warriors, who have been red hot as of late. And it just seems like Aaron Gordon continues to get better every time you watch him play and ask him to do more. The three-point shooting has been there. The playmaking has been there. What you can ask him to do to actually generate some offense from time to time. It was all him, right? They didn't turn to Michael Porter and ask him to run the offense. It was mostly Aaron Gordon, and he was incredible in that game. Some random other rapid fire here. Denny Advia, post-All-Star break, is averaging 22, 9, and 5 on 52, 46, and 78% shooting splits. So if we were to have like an All-Star break right now, he would be on that roster. I don't really know what to make of that. I don't even know if he's the most valuable asset on Portland right now, but what I do know is the contract that they signed Denny to is aging very well. He has been playing fantastic and just wanted to find a way to work it into the show here. Kobe White is averaging 30 points per game over his last 9 games while shooting over 50% from the field. The Bulls are 7-2 in that stretch, really just firing up to land in that number 9 seed in the Eastern Conference like they do every year. And because of Kobe White's efforts the past couple of weeks, he was back-to-back Eastern Conference Player of the Week. And the last Bull to do that was Michael Jordan. So fun fact, I think the most interesting part of that is that they actually gave out Eastern Conference Player of the Week awards in the 90s. I did not know that. And the final rapid fire item I have for you is that DeAndre Jordan played 38 minutes last night in a win against the Houston Rockets for the Denver Nuggets. Yes, I did want to clarify. DeAndre Jordan is on the Denver Nuggets at this point in time, and him playing 38 minutes in a win is wild. Like the fact that a competitive team tossed out DeAndre Jordan for 38 minutes and it worked is electric. So good for DA. For him to have as long of his career as he's had is just ridiculous. And Blake Griffin's been retired for like 3 years at this point, and DeAndre Jordan is still getting contracts, and now he put up 38 minutes last night. So I think that's enough yapping from me today. That's going to do it for this podcast episode. Hopefully you guys enjoyed catching up on everything you missed during March Madness. Next week, I will be back with another episode, trying to get on a more consistent schedule, recording on Monday nights, posting that early Tuesday from here on out. So I am hoping to bring a guest on to maybe talk about one of the more interesting teams in the NBA. really, again, looking at those Western Conference teams, seeing if we can get somebody from one of those teams that's jockeying for a playoff spot right about now. If not, I am also throwing out the idea of doing a potential redraft of the 2024 NBA draft. I saw Simmons and Vasillo dive into that a little bit on their most recent podcast, and I did do that same idea at roughly this time last year. I honestly think if you look at my redraft from the 2023 NBA draft that I did, I think it might be like the worst piece of content that I've put out. Like, that list just aged terribly. Like, drafting's really hard, but it just made it even more embarrassing after I had watched those guys for basically a full season that I could still be that wrong on takes. But anyways, it kind of makes me want to do it again because it was just so bad. I want to see if I can get that same takeout for this year's draft class because I've really enjoyed watching the rookies despite there not being a lot of hype around them. So that's going to do it for this podcast. Be sure to follow at Words with Wallace on everything. Be sure to subscribe. Make sure you're following the show on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as supporting at Words with Wallace on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, all the good stuff there. And I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.